Good.
And we are live. So thank you everyone at Earth Action Hub, our participants, but thank you a lot to Joshua and Klaus who are here today to share with us beautiful images and information about glaciers and how they are important and how we completely ignore them, but how fundamental they are for our lives. So I'm happy to introduce Klaus Thymann, who is an incredible photographer, filmmaker, action adventure, everything. I have a great admiration for what he does, creating more awareness about the beauty and the importance of this planet and nature. And then we have Joshua Leigh, who is a glaciologist and has been studying already for a while glaciers and will explain us in details what he's doing. So Klaus, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, well, the floor, I guess it's a flat screen floor. So thank you very much for tuning in. I started off at some point being nervous because I am usually one layer less than everybody else. So I wear shorts pretty much in winter. And when it gets to summer, I get so hot that there's no more clothes to shred. So I like walk around naked pretty much. And then that was my lead into climate change and global warming. But I thought I can't really just document my own nudity. That would be a very inappropriate way to talk about climate change. So I did some research more than a decade ago and was looking at how can we communicate around climate change in a way that is scientifically accurate, but also in a way that's engaging. Cut to glaciers. Glaciers are part of the landscapes. Artists have used landscapes for centuries. And so as such, the idea of having an artistic interpretation of glaciers would fit very well within using art to communicate around climate change, thereby creating action. Based on that, I founded a charity called Project Pressure. And so the idea of communicating around glaciers came about because they are key indicators of climate change. And Josh, why is it that? Because climate change, sometimes we talk about fires, we talk about flooding, we talk about a lot of things, but what is it with glaciers that makes them very good at indicating climate change?
Well, I guess that's a great question, Klaus. So I guess in the simplistic terms, when we think about glaciers are just big blocks of ice sitting on mountainsides and in the landscape. And fundamentally, when temperatures warm up, ice starts to melt. And this is happening throughout our mountain regions across the globe. Glaciers are melting and receding as a result of anthropogenically forced, so man-made climate change. And that melt is increasing with rates of glacier recession unprecedented within the historical record.
Should we maybe talk a little bit about the timescales? Because if we have weather events, it can be a very hot day, it can be a cold day, but the reaction for glaciers kind of like evens out over time, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, if we think about glacier recession, I think a good place to start is thinking about when glaciers were at their most recent maximum extent, which is that of the Little Ice Age. That happened around 200 years ago, give or take. It varies a little bit, but 200 years is a good time frame. So the mid 1800s maybe. So that was when they were at their most extensive, and they've just receded since then. With that recession really starting to peak over the last, say, since like the 1950s or so.
Okay, so you mentioned the mountains, but I mean, we find glaciers where it's cold, but should we just define what is a glacier actually? So a glacier is, what is a glacier?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a glacier fundamentally is a large volume of ice sitting on the Earth's surface that flows. So it flows as a result normally of internal deformation. But there's all sorts of complex reasons as to what modulates glacier flow. But effectively, it's just ice that sits on the Earth's surface and flows very, very slowly.
we should maybe also mention that it's permanent, meaning that if we get snow and ice coming in winter and it disappears in summer, that's not a glacier for half of the year. A glacier is a permanent feature.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. And so where do we find glaciers? Because I normally say we go up, down, like north, south, or up. So it needs to be cold, right?
Yeah, exactly. You need to be either at high elevations or in the polar regions. You need to have snow falling in these areas regularly to build up ice. So you have this transition from snow through to firn through to ice as it builds up, that it stacks over many years. Snow stacks on top of each other and it transitions to ice. So it needs to be in cold environments.
Okay, and because let's just say if we work, there's 5, 6, or 7 continent models, meaning that it can be 5, 6, or 7 continents. But if we work with a 7 continent model, there's actually glaciers on all 7 continents. Surprisingly, for many people, maybe there's glaciers in Africa, in South America. There's equatorial glaciers, and as Josh just mentioned, the reason that is because of the elevation. So they generally sit around the 5,000 meter mark, just around that, because that's when it gets cold enough. And with climate change, that is going up, but the mountains aren't getting higher, so they're disappearing. In the polar regions, they're melting. It used to be a saying that the heating in the polar region was twice as fast as it's actually 3 times as fast. New studies show, but just really fundamentally, I mean, why are glaciers important?
Glaciers are important for a wide variety of reasons, Klaus. In some areas, glaciers provide the key source of water that many mountain communities rely on. These are valuable water resources. They modulate stream flow throughout the year.
How do they do that? Because I mean, if it rains, you get water, right? So what function does a glacier do?
So a glacier acts as a water store, effectively. There's always.
Oh, I think you froze, Josh. Let's see if you come back. Paula, can you hear Josh? No? Okay. So glaciers basically, my understanding is that they work as a storage facility. So you can think of the snow landing on the glacier. You get the ice, the snow landing on the ice becoming ice, and we have recession periods and then growth periods, and during the growth periods they accumulate because there's snow landing on them, and that's usually in winter if we talk about the seasons. And then if we have the summer period, which is the melt period, we normally have the glacier being affected by the sun, and then it melts. So when it normally would be dry in summer in many regions, the glacier, because it's there, releases water slowly because of the melt, meaning that there's a stable water flow, or more stable than it would be, a stable water flow in the rivers. Now, if you don't have dams or other irrigation systems, then what you can do is that then you can, of course, we need to admit here. So you can, of course, use that water flow that's consistent as a way to have irrigation in summer, and so on and so on. So, Josh, are you back?
I am here. 1 second. Let me.
Okay, sure.
What happened there? Apologies.
That's okay. Well, I was just slowly explaining that the glaciers they work as they regulate the water flow in rivers. So when we think of this, we've heard a lot about flooding, and flooding can also be bad. So if a glacier disappears when it rains, it actually means you get all the water at once. So that is bad news, because too much water is not a good thing, and too little is not a good thing. So glaciers are a really great thing because they kind of moderate and allow the mountain communities to control this. So there's a lot of storage in the world's ice. I think it's something like 96% of the Earth's freshwater is stored in glacier and ice bodies throughout the world, predominantly in Antarctica and in Greenland, of course, because there's a lot of ice there. But so the communities, and we talk about millions of people, right, that are depending on this. So in which regions is that mostly? Do you know, Josh?
So in these are communities that rely heavily on glacier-fed water are your high mountain communities, and also in these like semi-arid environments as well. So throughout the Andes, up in the Himalayas, these are, and I guess if you think about the Himalayas, the glaciers there feed some of the biggest rivers in the world. You know, they feed all the way down. So you know, they're considered like a big water tower. So a loss of permanent ice up in the high mountains will affect all the way downstream throughout the year, especially in those dry seasons.
Okay, and beyond the as a water resource, why else are glaciers important?
So beyond water security, you have issues associated with surface albedo, which is the reflective properties of the Earth's surface. So if you think about ice and snow, they reflect a lot of light, and so
why do they reflect light?
They're very bright surfaces. So albedo is effectively a measure of the reflectiveness of a surface. It goes from 0 being nothing is reflected to 1, which would be effectively perfect reflectance. So within that, you have different levels of reflectiveness. So snow, like fresh snow, would have a very high reflectiveness, so about 0.9. And if you think about a dark surface, say open ocean, that's typically around 0.06, or tarmac or asphalt, that black surface can be as low as 0.04. So you see these different surfaces reflect different levels of light. So if you lose lots of snow cover in the high mountains, snow and ice cover, you're just going to have more dark surfaces to absorb more light, and more solar radiation, which can result in more feedback cycles of heating and stuff.
Okay, cool. So what's happening also throughout the world is that as glacier and snowfall change, when a glacier recedes, normally you see the soil or the ground or the rocks underneath, right? Which has a different color.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's the same with the sea ice, I guess, or?
Yeah, big implications for sea ice in the Northern Hemisphere, which is one of the reasons why the Arctic warms at a much greater rate, is because we're suddenly with decreasing sea ice extent over the Arctic, we're increasing the open ocean, which means you can get more heating of that ocean. And again, this leads to what we would call a positive feedback, where heating of the ocean means less sea ice forms the next year, which means there's longer periods where open ocean is exposed, which means it can heat more. You know, these things they kind of snowball, for want of a better word. They snowball, even though snow is disappearing.
Okay. And so one of the things that's important is that trying to predict the future. I mean, good luck with that. We've been trying that for years. But anyway, on a scientific note, making some sort of estimates of what will happen is hugely important. And for that, there's a few ways of looking at the past. So what we can do is that you can look at the past in a way where you maybe look at historic pictures to see where the glaciers were, and then you can see if they shrunk or if they have receded. So it's not more than 90. There's about 300,000 glaciers in the world, as a rough estimate, maybe at least, and 99% are receding. There are abnormalities where climate change affects the weather pattern, so you get more snow, so a few are accumulating, but it is really an abnormality. So most are receding, and looking at historic events and trying to predict what will happen is hugely important. One way of doing that is using historic images. Before we go to Josh, we have a little short film here that Project Pressure did that is been shown on our exhibitions, but I'll play that now so you can have a look. It's 2 minutes. So the Tafala Valley is up in northern Sweden, just bordering Norway. So we got historic images from the Swedish Air Force that have been photographing this and then created these 3D models. So what we saw here is that's one way of measuring glaciers, because to measure what's happening with the glacier, you need to have points in time so you can see how it was and where it is now. So there's essentially primarily, you can say there's a couple of ways of doing it. One way is what's called remote sensing, which is essentially using satellite pictures. Now, for those of you who study space history probably know the satellites weren't really launched until the middle of last century. So they only go so far back. And if we look at historic records, and if we want to talk about glacier extent, we might want to go even further back. And then secondly, the satellites didn't cover the entire globe, so we have very patchy records. The other way is to use comparative photographs. So that can be a photograph taken a while ago and then finding the same spot and seeing what's happening. But if we don't have that, then you find the gravestones, Josh, right? What happened? Tell us about your research.
So yeah, exactly like you say, photographs play a key role. A lot of those photographs are from not with no scientific intent originally. So you can use these family photographs. But what I do is I use a technique called Lycometric or Lycometric dating. It's quite simple.
Show me your pictures from your film, maybe. Yeah.
Let me give some photographs examples.
Yeah, sure. So what area is it that you've been to?
I've worked across the globe. I do work a lot at the moment. Well, I work in Norway at the moment, but I've worked in Austria and New Zealand.
So Norway is the same latitude as the film we just saw, right? So similar landscape. Yeah.
Cool. So hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, great.
Brilliant. So if I just, I'll just leave it like this for now.
That's fine. Yeah, cool.
So
tell us a little bit about how did you do dating? I mean,
so yeah, so I use. Can you still see the screen? I've just put it into a. Brilliant. So I use lichen. So these are very slow growing. They're not quite a plant, but they kind of exist in this. They're a combination of algae and.
Should we just call it a slow growing vegetation?
Yeah, slow growing vegetation is great. So they grow on the rock surface. They grow really slowly. And what we can do is if we have lichen growing on a surface of known age, such as a gravestone, where you've got the age inscribed on the rock, you can say, well, a lichen of a certain size is likely a certain age. So you can go to surfaces of unknown age, so your glacier deposits. You can measure lichen on these glacier deposits, and you can say, well, we can correlate the largest lichen here to the largest lichen on a headstone, and maybe we get a date that says this moraine was formed maybe in the early 1900s or the mid 1800s, you know. So we can use these lichen that grow on all the moraines we find, and we can work out, we get some estimation of age effectively.
So how do you find, I mean, how do you have to get permission to go to the gravestones? Or, I mean, I guess you're not doing anything that's intrusive, are you? What happens?
No, so in the graveyards, you know, it's always good where we can to ask permission, but sometimes, you know, it's not possible. Maybe these churchyards, you know, are just unmanned effectively, or there's no one there to look after them. They might be so we're not doing anything intrusive. We're literally just measuring with a flexible tape measure there, you know, and examining these lichen.
So you do that, and then you go out and find the glaciers. What does that look like? What does your field work look like? Tell us about a day in the field.
Yeah, so a day in the field. Let's have a look here. It looks like this on a good day. It can look pretty fabulous. We have all these glacial deposits here, all in the field, and we go around and we find rocks, suitable rocks that host lichen species, and we can measure them. Or we can do other techniques as well.
Cool.
So here's me.
How long are you in the field for normally?
I can be in the field from anywhere from a couple of weeks to up to a month, maybe. It really depends on, a lot of the time it depends on money, how much funding I have to support myself in the field. But also just, you know, if you know you're going to get seriously bad weather, then you're not going to be able to do anything. So you might just call it quits on that day, or but yeah, so I would a lot of the time when I work in Norway, in really isolated environments. So you hike everything that you can carry up into the mountains, and you just camp. You're self-sufficient for 2-3 weeks. So in those situations, you effectively spend.
What is the most important thing for you to bring?
Oh, I mean, I guess apart from your tent and your sleeping bag, I think my most prized piece of field equipment is probably my digital camera. I can, you know, it's hard to remember everything you see, but if you can take photographs, you've got a really valuable archive of information that you can refer back to when you're sitting at your desk maybe a year later. And digital photography means that I can carry memory cards of like, and they just fit so many photographs, so I can never take too many photographs. So I think a digital camera is the best bit of kit I can take into the field.
I guess your research is also kind of like fairly visual with the lichen and so on. So I can see there's a TPS there. So is that how you know where the lichen is? Because if you just have the close up, you have no idea where it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so if I'm working, I can record the GPS measurements, and I would effectively just take that point. So if anyone else wants to go back and look at these same things, or, you know, check my work or build on my work, or if I want to go back, I know exactly where I've been within a couple of meters. So it's quite easy to find these areas again.
So what can you report from the field? What are you seeing? What's the lichen telling you?
So it's telling me about surface age effectively. How old is this? How long is this?
Not in general terms. What is happening in the field?
Oh, so what we're seeing these deposits that were formed hundreds of years ago. So we're getting the glacier would have ended at that point, however many years ago. So we're just getting a record of that in the landscape. We're building up a picture of glacier recession.
Okay, now, I mean, but are the glaciers in a good condition? Is it bad? I mean, what's the report from the field?
It's pretty bad, yeah. If we think about, like I said earlier, the most recent period of glacier expansion, they're receding. They've receded a lot, maybe kilometers, and in some areas, we're seeing these, which once would have been big, healthy glaciers. They're now looking pretty unhealthy. Sitting in isolated cirques, maybe starting to not only recede but also down waste, so become thinner. So they're just getting smaller.
Okay,
unanimously.
So basically we're just seeing the effects of climate change. But no, thank you, Josh. That's been super interesting. Should we, before we kind of finish, should we maybe allow a few people a few questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Klaus and Josh, for this beautiful image and kind of painful information to hear about. We have a question from our audience that says, do you have any information how loss of European alpine glaciers will directly affect downstream communities in Europe, as this may be effective in raising awareness among wealthier countries responsible largely for the loss of glaciers?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's many questions there.
Basically,
yeah, but without going into details about who's responsible, but yes, the European glaciers are receding, and I think in Europe the main thing is that, of course, the downstream is being used for agriculture and so on, but because of the richness, I mean, how rich society is, it's possible to mitigate those effects. I think for Europe, it's more, it seems more like a cultural loss, that the Alps has this rich history of being the Alps, the Alpines, where people would go mountaineering, they would ski in winter. There's a whole culture associated with this. And I think that's the loss. The other thing that's quite interesting that not a lot of people know about, actually, some glaciers, they form the border between countries. So the border between Switzerland and Italy, for instance, is the ridge of a glacier. And as the glaciers are moving and receding, the borders of Europe are actually changing. But I think that's the main thing. Of course, hydropower will be affected, but which is an important thing since those hydro dams have been built already. And so there are effects, but in essence, it's not threatening the livelihood of Europeans because of the wealth of society and the way to mitigate. There's also fairly outrageous attempts trying to save glaciers, putting big blankets over them, which is trying to slow down the melt, but it's a pretty pathetic way of trying to solve climate change. Yeah,
I'd also like to add as well, Klaus, that you also have mountain destabilization. So glaciers hold up these mountains. So when the glaciers recede, you have more mountains which are unstable and they tend to collapse more. So we're seeing also an increase in rockfall activity throughout many alpine regions, and in the Alps particularly, a lot of communities live high up in these mountain environments. There's a lot of tourism and stuff. So there's increasing risk to alpine communities and tourism, which is a massive income for the Alps. A lot of people come to these regions to see glaciers and to ski and to climb and to mountaineer. So a loss of ice has big impacts for risk and tourism, like you said.
Cool.
Thank you, Josh. And then we have a last question for today. as hopefully the carbonization of our atmosphere is increasing and there will be less CO2 and pollution, do you have an idea how long it will take for glaciers to get back to the pre-industrial evolution stage?
That is a good question. I think not within our lifetimes or many generations' lifetimes. I think we're going to be seeing glacier recession for the next century, you know. And the point is, many of these glaciers are going to disappear within the next 100 years, and they're not going to come back. You know, it would take such dramatic cooling, which just would not happen. You know, with climate change, there are also inbuilt natural variations, and these operate on thousands of years. You know, you would need.
But maybe we should mention, so when the carbon that ends up in the atmosphere, first of all, there's a lag from that till the heating, and then once it heats up, there's a lag from the heating till the melting. So what the results we're seeing now and the acceleration of glacier recession on a global scale is really just the beginning. And as just said, even if we were to reverse input of carbon in the atmosphere, we wouldn't reap the result for a very, very long time. So it's kind of what's been so disappointing about all these missed opportunities and deadlines of curbing emissions, because it's almost like, because the timescales are so long, people haven't understood the urgency. And I guess the main takeaway is that the urgency was last decade. It's like it is really time to solve this ASAP, and yesterday is not good enough. Do you know what I mean? It has to be now.
The best time to take climate action was 50 years ago. The second best time is now.
Oh, great words, Josh. I think we should finish on that.
Thank you very, very, very much, Klaus and Josh. And I feel this is a last chance we have, really. But let's stay hopeful for also the young people participating at Earth Action Hub, and as we all together in making this shift of taking care of the planet. It might happen that people will finally take action now and not tomorrow. But thank you really very much for your time and really insightful information, as not many people know about glaciers and its importance and their history and how that started. And we thank our also participants in being here today, and we invite everyone to explore more the Earth Action Hub, more talks and conversation to come today, also our forum and networking lounge. But thank you again to Klaus and Josh for their time and knowledge they share with us. Bye.